Close your eyes and let me take you back over 2,700 years, to an epic poem, the Odyssey. It is one of the oldest works of Western literature still widely read today, a timeless tale of adventure, perseverance, and the longing for home. Our story begins not at the beginning, but near the end of a much longer journey. The hero of our tale is Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a small but prosperous island kingdom in the Ionian Sea. Odysseus had left his home 10 years earlier to fight in the legendary Trojan War, a conflict that would last an entire decade. But now, as our story opens, the war has been over for another 10 years, and still, Odysseus has not returned home. The Odyssey itself spans just the final 41 days of Odysseus's 20-year absence, though through flashbacks and storytelling, we learn of all his adventures. This narrative structure was revolutionary for its time. Homer chose to begin his epic in medias res, which means in the middle of things, rather than at the chronological start of events. While Odysseus struggles to return home, his wife Penelope waits faithfully in Ithaca, though she is besieged by over 100 suitors who have taken up residence in her palace. These suitors consume Odysseus's wealth day after day, pressuring Penelope to choose one of them as her new husband, believing Odysseus must surely be dead after so many years. Penelope, however, remains clever and resourceful. To delay choosing a suitor, she tells them she must first finish weaving a funeral shroud for Odysseus's elderly father, Laertes. But each night, she secretly unravels the day's weaving, a deception she maintains for 3 years before the suitors discover her trick. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Penelope's son, Telemachus, has grown from infant to young man during his father's absence. At the opening of the epic, Telemachus is about 20 years old, having never known his father, yet feeling the weight of his household falling into chaos under the suitors' occupation. The ancient Greeks believed the Odyssey was composed sometime in the 8th century BCE, but the poem itself is set in the mythical Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BCE. Homer's work was originally part of an oral tradition, meant to be sung or recited from memory by professional performers called rhapsodes, before it was eventually written down. The very first word of the Odyssey in ancient Greek is andra, meaning man or the man, as Homer invokes the muse to sing of the man of many ways, who wandered far after sacking the holy city of Troy. This invocation of the muse was traditional in epic poetry, asking for divine inspiration to tell the story properly. And so, on Mount Olympus, where the gods make their home among the clouds, a divine council is taking place. Odysseus's fate hangs in the balance, for while the sea god Poseidon holds a terrible grudge against him, the goddess Athena, patron of wisdom and warfare, has taken Odysseus under her protection. She pleads with her father Zeus, king of all gods, to finally allow the long-suffering hero to return home to Ithaca, to his waiting wife, his grown son, and the kingdom that still needs him. Zeus, seated upon his golden throne, listens to Athena's plea. The timing is fortuitous. Poseidon, the god who has been tormenting Odysseus across the wine-dark seas, is far away in Ethiopia, feasting with the blameless Ethiopians. In his absence, Zeus agrees that it is time for Odysseus to finally come home. But let us pause here and understand why Poseidon harbors such hatred for our hero. Years earlier, on one of his many adventures trying to reach home, Odysseus and his men had landed on an island inhabited by the Cyclopes, a race of giant, one-eyed shepherds who lived in caves without laws or civilization. These Cyclopes were the sons of Poseidon himself, wild and dangerous creatures who knew nothing of hospitality or the sacred customs of guest friendship that the Greeks held so dear. Odysseus and 12 of his men entered the cave of Polyphemus, the most savage of all the Cyclopes, hoping to receive the traditional gifts that hosts were expected to offer strangers. Instead, they became trapped when Polyphemus rolled an enormous boulder across the cave entrance, a stone so massive that 22 wagons could not move it. The monster then proceeded to devour 2 of Odysseus's men for his dinner, crushing their bones and eating them raw, like a mountain lion with its prey. But Odysseus, known throughout Greece for his cunning intelligence and gift for strategy, devised a clever plan. He offered Polyphemus wine, strong, undiluted wine that the Cyclops had never tasted before. When the giant asked Odysseus his name, the crafty hero replied nobody, a deception that would soon prove brilliant. After Polyphemus drank himself into a stupor, Odysseus and his surviving men heated a massive wooden stake in the fire until it glowed red, then drove it deep into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him completely. When Polyphemus screamed in agony, the other Cyclopes gathered outside his cave, calling out to ask what was wrong. "Nobody is killing me," Polyphemus cried, and so his fellow giants left, thinking him mad or troubled by divine dreams. This moment showcases the Greek concept of metis, meaning cunning intelligence or wisdom, which was just as valued as physical strength in ancient Greek culture. Odysseus and his men escaped by clinging to the undersides of Polyphemus's giant sheep when he let them out to graze the next morning, the blind Cyclops feeling only the backs of his animals as they passed. But here, Odysseus made a fatal error, one born of pride rather than wisdom. As his ship pulled away from the shore, he shouted back his true identity to the blinded giant, boasting that it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, sacker of cities, who had defeated him. This act of hubris, excessive pride that offends the gods, would cost Odysseus dearly. Polyphemus called out to his father Poseidon, praying that Odysseus would never reach home, or if the fates decreed he must return, that he would arrive late, broken, having lost all his companions, and find trouble waiting in his house. Poseidon heard his son's prayer and vowed to make Odysseus suffer across every mile of ocean between Troy and Ithaca, a journey that should have taken mere weeks but would instead consume 10 agonizing years. And so Poseidon's wrath explains why Odysseus, even now as we rejoin our story, remains stranded far from home on the island of Ogygia, held captive, though gently, by the beautiful nymph Calypso. For 7 long years, Odysseus has been Calypso's prisoner and reluctant lover, and each day he sits on the rocky shore, weeping as he gazes toward the horizon, yearning for his homeland and his faithful wife. Calypso's island of Ogygia is a paradise unlike any mortal has ever seen. Her cave dwelling is surrounded by soft meadows where violets bloom, and 4 crystalline springs flow with pure water. Ancient trees, alders, black poplars, and fragrant cypresses tower overhead, providing homes for countless seabirds. Grapevines heavy with clusters wind around her grotto, and the air itself seems to shimmer with an otherworldly beauty that even the immortal gods would marvel at if they visited. Yet for all this beauty, Odysseus remains miserable. Calypso, whose name means the concealer or the one who hides, has offered him something no mortal could refuse, immortality itself, and eternal youth to go with it, if only he would consent to stay with her forever and be her husband. But Odysseus refuses this divine gift. He would rather be mortal, grow old, and die as all humans must, if only he can do so in his beloved Ithaca, with Penelope by his side. This choice reveals something profound about the ancient Greek worldview, the idea that mortality, painful as it is, gives human life its meaning and beauty. The Greeks believed that it was precisely because our time is limited that our loves, our homes, and our accomplishments matter so deeply. Now, with Zeus's decree from Olympus, Athena sets her own plans in motion. The goddess cannot yet free Odysseus directly, she must wait for Hermes, the messenger god, to carry Zeus's command to Calypso. But there is other work to be done. Athena disguises herself as Mentes, an old family friend, and travels to Ithaca to visit Telemachus, hoping to inspire the young prince to take action against the suitors who are destroying his home. When Athena arrives at Odysseus's palace, she finds a shocking scene. The suitors lounge arrogantly throughout the halls, playing board games, drinking wine, and feasting on Odysseus's livestock as if they own the place. They treat the absent king's possessions with contempt, slaughtering his cattle and sheep day after day, wasting his wealth in their pursuit of Penelope's hand in marriage. The Odyssey contains exactly 12,110 lines of ancient Greek poetry, divided into 24 books or chapters, each book originally named after a letter of the Greek alphabet. Ancient scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, centuries after Homer's time, were the ones who divided the epic into these 24 sections, making it easier to reference and study. Athena finds young Telemachus sitting among the suitors, looking forlorn and powerless, daydreaming about his father, imagining how Odysseus might suddenly appear and scatter these parasites from his halls. The disguised goddess takes the young man aside and plants courage in his heart. She tells him he must stop being a child and become a man. He should call an assembly of all Ithaca's citizens, publicly denounce the suitors' behavior, and then embark on a journey to seek news of his father. She instructs Telemachus to sail first to Pylos, to visit old King Nestor, the wisest of all the Greek warriors who fought at Troy. Then he should travel to Sparta, to the palace of King Menelaus and his wife Helen, yes, the same Helen whose legendary beauty sparked the Trojan War when Paris of Troy stole her from Menelaus. These kings might have news of Odysseus's fate, Athena suggests, or at least can help Telemachus understand what it means to be the son of such a hero. This journey that Athena proposes for Telemachus makes up the first 4 books of the Odyssey, a section sometimes called the Telemachy by scholars. It serves as a coming-of-age story within the larger epic, showing how the prince transforms from a passive, uncertain boy into a decisive young man worthy of his father's legacy. Through Telemachus's eyes, we also learn about the devastating impact of the Trojan War on an entire generation of Greek families, so many fathers who never came home, so many sons who grew up without knowing their fathers. After Athena departs, leaving Telemachus filled with newfound determination, the young prince lies awake that night in his chamber. For the first time in his life, he feels the stirring of true courage, the sense that perhaps he can take control of his own destiny and the fate of his household. Outside his window, the Mediterranean stars will slowly overhead, the same stars his father has been navigating by for 20 long years. The next morning, Telemachus does something he has never done before. He calls an assembly of all Ithaca's citizens. This is the first time the people of the island have gathered in formal assembly since Odysseus himself departed for Troy 20 years earlier. The detail is significant, revealing just how completely the social order has broken down in the absence of their king. Telemachus stands before the assembled crowd, and for the first time, he speaks with his father's voice. He denounces the suitors publicly, explaining how they devour his inheritance, how they show no respect for the gods' sacred law of hospitality, and how they pressure his mother day and night to choose a new husband. His words are powerful, and he weeps openly as he speaks, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming injustice of it all. He throws down the speaker's staff in frustration, and the crowd is moved to pity by this young man's suffering. Yet despite the people's sympathy, no one acts to help him. The suitors are too numerous, too powerful, and they come from noble families throughout Ithaca and the surrounding islands. One suitor, Antinous, even has the audacity to blame Penelope herself, recounting her trick with the weaving of Laertes' shroud and claiming she has led them on with false hope. The assembly ends with nothing resolved, but Telemachus has taken his first step into manhood simply by speaking the truth aloud. With the help of Athena, still disguised, now as another family friend named Mentor, Telemachus secretly prepares a ship and crew. He does not tell his mother he is leaving, fearing she would try to stop him or that the suitors might prevent his departure. That very night, while the suitors sleep off their feasting, Telemachus and his small crew slip away from Ithaca's harbor under cover of darkness, sailing toward Pylos on the mainland of Greece. The ancient Greeks practiced a sacred custom called xenia, which can be translated as guest friendship or hospitality. This was a religiously enforced code that required hosts to welcome strangers, feed them, bathe them, give them gifts, and only then ask who they were and what they needed. Violations of xenia were considered offenses against Zeus himself, who was sometimes called Zeus Xenios, Zeus the protector of guests. The suitors' behavior in Odysseus's palace represents a profound violation of this sacred law. They are guests who refuse to leave and who consume their host's wealth without shame. Meanwhile, far across the sea on Ogygia, the messenger god Hermes arrives at Calypso's island, his golden sandals carrying him swift as the wind over the waves. Hermes finds the nymph singing beautifully as she weaves at her loom with a golden shuttle, her voice echoing through her fragrant cave. But Odysseus is nowhere near her. As always, he sits on the rocky shore, his eyes wet with tears, staring hopelessly toward the horizon. Hermes delivers Zeus's command: Calypso must release Odysseus. The nymph is heartbroken and angry. She protests that the male gods are hypocrites. They take mortal women as lovers whenever they please, but when a goddess loves a mortal man, they grow jealous and interfere. She reminds Hermes of other goddesses who loved mortals, Dawn with Orion, and Demeter with Iasion, and how the gods struck down or opposed those relationships as well. But even Calypso, immortal as she is, cannot defy Zeus's direct command. With a heavy heart, she goes to Odysseus on the shore and tells him he is free to go. At first, Odysseus doesn't believe her. After 7 years of captivity, he suspects some trick or trap. The Odyssey frequently shows us Odysseus's suspicious nature, his tendency to trust no one completely, always looking for the deception or hidden danger. This wariness has kept him alive through countless perils, but it also reveals the psychological cost of his long ordeal. He has become a man who cannot easily accept good fortune at face value. Calypso swears a binding oath by the river Styx, the most sacred and unbreakable oath any god can make, that she means him no harm and truly intends to help him. She provides him with tools, a bronze axe, and adze for shaping wood, and shows him where the tall trees grow on her island. For 4 days, Odysseus works like a master carpenter, cutting down 20 trees, trimming them, smoothing them, and boring holes to join them together with wooden pegs and careful joinery. The detailed description of Odysseus building his raft showcases Homer's intimate knowledge of Bronze Age shipbuilding techniques. Odysseus constructs his vessel with a broad beam for stability, fits it with a mast and yard, fashions a steering oar, and weaves willow branches into sides to keep out the waves. Calypso brings him cloth for a sail and provisions for his journey, bread, water, and wine, along with favorable winds to speed him on his way. After 7 years of imprisonment, Odysseus finally sets sail from Ogygia, navigating by the stars just as ancient sailors did, keeping the constellation of the Bear, what we call Ursa Major or the Big Dipper, on his left as Calypso instructed him. For 17 days and 17 nights, Odysseus sails across the open sea, guiding his small raft by the stars. He keeps vigilant watch, never allowing sleep to close his eyelids, his eyes fixed on the Pleiades, the late-setting Boötes, and the Bear that wheels around in place and watches Orion. These constellations were the ancient sailors' map, their positions in the sky revealing direction and the passage of time through the long Mediterranean nights. On the 18th day, Odysseus can finally see land, the shadowy mountains of Phaeacia rising from the sea like a shield laid upon the misty horizon. His heart lifts with hope after so many years of wandering. Home seems, at last, within reach. But Poseidon, the earth-shaker, the god who commands the seas, is returning now from his distant feast in Ethiopia. From the mountains of the Salami, far to the east, Poseidon spots Odysseus on his raft, and the god's fury ignites like a storm. So, Poseidon thunders, the other gods have changed their minds about Odysseus while I was away. He's nearly reached Phaeacia, where it's destined he'll escape the chain of sorrows I've bound him with. But I'll give him his fill of trouble yet. Poseidon gathers the clouds with his trident and stirs up the sea, summoning winds from every direction. The east wind and the south wind clash together, the fierce west wind and the heaven-born north wind roll up massive waves. Odysseus's knees buckle and his heart fails him as he watches the towering walls of water rise around his fragile raft. He cries out in anguish, wishing he had died at Troy with honor, beneath the walls of that great city, rather than drowning alone and forgotten in the middle of the sea. Just then, a massive wave crashes down upon him, spinning his raft like a spinning wheel twirls thistledown in autumn winds. The mast snaps, the sail and yardarm are flung far across the water, and Odysseus himself is thrown into the churning depths, held down by the weight of the clothing Calypso gave him. When he finally surfaces, gasping and choking on seawater, he struggles back to his raft and clings to it desperately as the winds drive it helplessly across the savage sea. But Odysseus is not without divine aid. A sea goddess named Leucothea, who was once a mortal woman with a mortal's voice before she received honor among the gods in the ocean's depths, takes pity on him. She rises from the waves like a seabird and perches on his raft, offering him her veil, a magical item imbued with divine power. She instructs him to tie the veil around his chest, abandon his raft, and swim for the Phaeacian shore. As long as he wears her veil, she promises, he cannot die or suffer harm. Odysseus, ever cautious and suspicious, hesitates. What if this is another divine trick, another trap set by the gods? He decides to cling to his raft as long as its timbers hold together, but Poseidon sends another massive wave that shatters the vessel completely, scattering its logs across the water like winnowed chaff. Now Odysseus has no choice. He strips off his heavy clothing, ties the goddess's veil around his chest, and dives headlong into the sea, stretching out his arms and swimming with all his strength toward the distant land. The Odyssey is composed in a specific poetic meter called dactylic hexameter, which means each line contains 6 metrical feet, most of them dactyls, a long syllable followed by 2 short syllables, creating a rhythm that sounds like waves rolling onto shore or the steady beat of oars pulling through water. This meter was the traditional form for Greek epic poetry, and when recited or sung aloud, it would have created a hypnotic, rhythmic effect that helped audiences follow the story through hours of performance. For 2 full days and 2 nights, Odysseus swims through the hostile sea, kept alive only by the goddess's veil and his own tremendous endurance. The Odyssey frequently emphasizes Odysseus's extraordinary physical resilience. He is not just clever but also remarkably tough, able to withstand hardships that would kill ordinary men. Finally, on the 3rd day, the winds die down and he can see the shore clearly, close enough now to hear the thunder of waves crashing against the rocky coastline. But even now, danger threatens. The entire coast is jagged with cliffs and reefs where the surf pounds mercilessly. If Odysseus tries to land, the waves will dash him against the rocks and crush his bones. He swims desperately along the shore, searching for a safe harbor or a sheltered beach, his hands and knees scraped raw by the barnacled stones whenever a wave throws him against the coast. At last, he finds the mouth of a river, and he prays to the river god for mercy, begging for safe passage. The god hears his prayer and stills the current, allowing Odysseus to swim into calmer water and finally drag himself onto solid ground. Odysseus collapses on the riverbank, utterly exhausted, more dead than alive. Salt water streams from his mouth and nostrils, and he lies there unable to breathe or speak, completely spent, his body swollen from the sea. When at last he catches his breath, he remembers the sea goddess's veil still tied around his chest. True to his word, he unties it and tosses it back into the river's current, where it flows down to the sea and back into Ino's waiting hands. But now Odysseus faces a new dilemma. The sun is setting, and night is coming on. If he sleeps here by the river, exposed to the open air, the cold night frost and river mist might kill him in his weakened state, the final irony, to survive Poseidon's storm only to die of exposure on the shore. Yet if he climbs into the woods and finds shelter, wild beasts might devour him while he sleeps. After considering his options, Odysseus decides the woods offer the better chance. He finds 2 olive trees growing from the same spot, their branches so thickly intertwined that neither the force of wet winds nor the blazing sun nor penetrating rain could pierce through them. Beneath these trees, he gathers a huge pile of fallen leaves, enough to cover 2 or 3 men even in the harshest winter weather, and buries himself within them like a farmer in a remote field covering a burning log with black ash to preserve the seed of fire. Athena sheds sweet sleep upon his eyes, closing his weary eyelids, releasing him at last from the terrible fatigue he has endured. And while Odysseus sleeps his deep, exhausted sleep beneath the olive trees, let us turn our attention back to young Telemachus, who has now reached Pylos and stands before the legendary King Nestor. Nestor is the oldest of all the Greek heroes who fought at Troy, a man so ancient he has ruled over 3 generations of men. The Odyssey tells us that Nestor was famous for his wisdom and his lengthy speeches. Indeed, the old king's tendency to tell long-winded stories became proverbial in ancient Greek culture. When Telemachus arrives, he finds Nestor and his sons performing a sacrifice to Poseidon on the beach, 9 companies of citizens with 500 men in each, offering 81 bulls to the god of the sea. Nestor welcomes Telemachus with perfect xenia, the sacred hospitality, even before learning his name. He seats the young stranger beside his own son Pisistratus, offers him food and wine, and includes him in the sacrifice to Poseidon. Only after Telemachus has eaten does Nestor ask who he is and what brings him to Pylos. This scene demonstrates the proper practice of Greek hospitality, a stark contrast to the suitors' behavior in Ithaca. When Telemachus reveals his identity and asks about his father, Nestor's face grows solemn. The old king tells him of the Greek army's return from Troy, how the victorious warriors quarreled even before leaving the conquered city. The supreme commander Agamemnon wanted to remain in Troy to offer more sacrifices to appease the gods, while his brother Menelaus urged immediate departure. The army split in 2, and this division, Nestor suggests, led to disaster for many of the homeward-bound Greeks. Nestor recounts the fate of mighty Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of all the Greek forces at Troy. While Agamemnon was away fighting for 10 years, his wife Clytemnestra took a lover named Aegisthus. When Agamemnon finally returned home victorious, bearing with him the Trojan princess Cassandra as his war prize, Aegisthus and Clytemnestra murdered him, striking him down at a welcome home feast, killing him like an ox at its manger. This story serves as a dark parallel to Odysseus's situation, a warning of what might await a returning hero if evil has taken root in his household during his absence. But Nestor also tells of Agamemnon's son, Orestes, who avenged his father's murder by killing both Aegisthus and his own mother Clytemnestra. The old king speaks of Orestes with great admiration, holding him up as an example of a son who honored his father's memory and set things right. The message to Telemachus is clear: he too must find the courage to act, to reclaim his father's house from those who would destroy it. The story of Agamemnon's murder and Orestes' revenge appears repeatedly throughout the Odyssey, mentioned by various characters at least 4 separate times. This parallel narrative serves as both a warning and an inspiration, showing the consequences of a household falling into corruption, but also demonstrating that justice can ultimately prevail when a son acts with courage and decisiveness. The Greeks would have been intimately familiar with this story, which was told and retold in their culture, and Homer uses it as a kind of mirror held up to Odysseus's own situation. As for Odysseus himself, Nestor admits he has heard nothing, no news of whether Odysseus is alive or dead, whether he wanders still or has perished somewhere on the wine-dark sea. But he encourages Telemachus to continue his quest, to visit Menelaus in Sparta, for Menelaus has only recently returned home and traveled more widely than any of the other Greeks. Perhaps he will have news that Nestor lacks. And so, with Nestor's son Pisistratus as his companion, Telemachus prepares to travel overland to Sparta, to the palace of Menelaus and Helen. Meanwhile, far away on the island of Phaeacia, dawn begins to touch the sky with rose-red fingers, and Odysseus stirs beneath his blanket of leaves, about to encounter the people who will finally, after so many years of wandering, help him return home.